Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all, to members of the North of Scotland group of Scottish Wildlife Trust, and to those of you from many other areas who are joining us tonight in our extension of this local group meeting to be a national webinar. So this is our first event in our programme for the autumn session of 2023-24. For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Cromarty, and I'm currently chair of the North of Scotland group of Scottish Wildlife Trust. We are also being joined tonight by Dan Poplett, and Dan is our vice chair, and he'll be chairing the questions and discussion session following tonight's presentation. Just before introducing our speaker for this evening, I have a couple of general items to bring to your attention. Firstly, as some of the local group members will know, and many of you who are members of the Scottish Wildlife Trust will know, of course, our very best wishes go to Dr. Kenny Taylor. Kenny can't be with us tonight because, like many naturalists and environmentalists, he finds himself in parts where the internet don't find themselves. So unfortunately, he's unable to be in tonight. But I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that Kenny was our former chair of the local group for 2 terms of office for a period of 6 years. And we all wish him all the very best in his new and challenging role, of course, as chair of the Scottish Wildlife Trust. We'll very much miss Kenny on our local committee. And of course, his departure creates, and together with another retiral from our local committee, creates an opportunity for new people to join our committee. So we currently have 2, possibly 3 vacancies, and any member who is interested in joining the local group committee is asked to get in touch with us by email. And the email address for this you will get off the website, or I'll give you it. It's SWTNOS Group, all one word, standing for Scottish Wildlife Trust, North of Scotland Group. So SWTNOS Group at gmail.com. So any expressions of interest will be warmly received, and we'll get back in touch with you. The second item I wanted to just bring to people's attention, many of you will be aware of this before we go into our evening, is the Scottish Government consultation on biodiversity plans, which is calling for views and closes on the 14th of December. So this consultation, the government proposes to pass a natural environment bill which would replace targets for nature restoration. Under the plans, work would be undertaken to stop biodiversity loss in Scotland by 2030 and on restoring Scotland's natural environment by 2045. Ambitious, I think we would acknowledge, but nevertheless, you've got to have ambitious targets. So the Biodiversity Minister, Lorna Slater, has stated that we are at the tipping point, as we are all aware, for nature. In Scotland alone, we have seen a 24% decline in the abundance of wildlife since 1990. That's a phenomenally fast rate of decline in a very short period of time in the bigger scheme of things. Of course, there are some species which have experienced a significantly greater percentage decline than this general figure, as we're aware. So all of this underpins the importance of everything we can do, both as individuals and as conservation organisations, to reverse this alarming trend. Actions are already being undertaken through important multi-organisation, multi-centre initiatives, such as Species on the Edge, for example. We need to lend as much support as possible to such national initiatives, while contributing also to many local conservation projects. We hope that you are getting involved in your own way, and of course the Scottish Wildlife Trust will be feeding in its views on the government's biodiversity plans in this very important consultation exercise. So with that, we'll turn to this evening's speaker, Professor Frank Rennie. Frank is a founding president of the Scottish Crofters Union and a pioneer in the use of online education. He is Professor of Sustainable Rural Development at the University of the Highlands and Islands and a Research Fellow at the UHI Environmental Research Institute. His research interests include human ecology, and new approaches to online networking for clear communication of science education. He has special research interests in rural and community development studies, particularly in terms of the impact of information and communication technology and online learning systems on rural communities. He also specialises in the relationship between nature conservation and the development of human communities, which of course we know is so important to the success of local projects, and one of which the Scottish Wildlife Trust is acutely aware, as are other conservation organisations, increasingly in working with local communities to achieve our goals. Absolutely essential. And you've heard that before from some of our other speakers in our programme in previous years. So, very briefly, I could go on about Frank's achievements at great length. I'm just going to say that he's written somewhere approaching 40 books, and tonight we're merely going to focus on one of them. So that'll keep the evening relatively manageable, we hope. The one of them that, of course, that we're concentrating on tonight is the book entitled The Corncrake, An Ecology of an Enigma, a wonderful title, published by Whittles Publishing this year. This is the first comprehensive and accessible account of the life cycle and ecology of this fascinating bird. The book has attracted very many complimentary reviews, of which I wish to quote one as follows. Has provided me with useful references and rewarding reading. Is likely to be the definitive monograph on the corncrake for decades to come. Like the corncrake, this book ranges far, not least in the breadth of research, both of science and cultural links. More than 700 reference works underpin the scholarship here, but dinna fear. The book is both a superb work of reference and a very good read. Another classic from the Rennie croft. Now, some of us may recognise, or should I say, ken the source of this wordsmithing, because that's doubtless the words of our former chair, Kenny Taylor. But I thought it encapsulated very nicely and very eloquently all the merits that the reviews have stipulated in the published literature about Frank's book. So Frank, we're really looking forward to your presentation tonight on the fascinating subject of the corncrake. And just on a personal note, I spent all my childhood holidays coming from Orkney in North Ronaldsay. And so every summer holidays were punctuated daily by the sound of quite a large number of corncrakes back in those days. So it's a sound with which I'm very familiar. I'm pleased to say it didn't keep me awake at nights, because when you've been out handling bales from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night, when your head hits the pillow, you're asleep. Corncrakes or no corncrakes. But anyway, a very warm welcome to you, Frank, and we're looking very much forward to hearing what you've got to say. So it's over to you.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks very much. I almost recognise myself in your comprehensive homework there. My grandfather's was from South Ronaldsay, so there's a wonderful quote, I think, that I included part in the book there about being in Orkney before the First World War and walking along the road, and virtually every field had corncrakes calling back and forward in it, and it was just that sheer buzz. The air was alive with them as it goes through. So yeah, good evening, everyone. I'm going to bring up the slides in a second and go through some slides. A couple of things I wanted to say before we get started in this. That this book came about. This book came about initially, I guess, because of the pandemic. When we came back from, well, I was actually out in Bhutan just at the very start of the pandemic, and came back, and the university said you have to work from home now because we don't know what's going to happen. This thing's kicking off. You have to stay at home for 2 weeks until we find out what's happening. We went, 2 weeks? Are you kidding? And then, of course, it turned out to be a lot longer than that. But I was then saved by having to commute back and forward half an hour each way, an hour a day, to the campus where I worked. So I saved 5 hours a week. And after a few weeks of this, when it looked like it was going to be a long affair, I decided to put that to sort of productive use. And I'd used the 5 hours a week that I saved to do what I'd meant to do for a long number of years, was bring together a whole bunch of information, notebooks, papers, articles in multiple languages. And that's interesting if you want to talk about that afterwards as well. To bring together what was known about the corncrake, because it's a bird that is it's been with me from as long as I can remember. There are slightly over 1,000 calling birds within Scotland, within the UK, but mainly within Scotland, almost entirely, 99%, I guess. And probably about 10% of them are within about 10 minutes of me. I live in the very northwest corner of the Isle of Lewis, right in the top, not quite at the butt of Lewis, just a wee bit south, but I can see the butt from my window here. And so all the down the west side here, most of the birds will be in the Hebrides, inner and outer. And so it's a familiar sound to me. But as I delved into it, I began to be fascinated by how much we didn't know, or how much we'd only just found out. So let me bring up the slides, and I'll take you through. I'll try not to sort of give you death by PowerPoint, but just to give us some feeling of what we're talking about, and then we'll go into some questions. The photographs that I have in the book here are going to be, let me try and bring this up. No, it's not liking that one as well. Give me that one as well. Why is it not giving me this one here? We did this. Nope. We had a problem earlier on when I did that as well. There we go. I think it's the order you do things on. So hopefully people can see that now, yeah?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so just to say that the photographs that I've used within this presentation are from my good friend John Love. Some of you will know, and John Love was instrumental in the reintroduction of the white-tailed eagle to Scotland. John lives in South Uist, and has corncrakes all around his house, and has some great. Most of my photographs are little brown smudges in the distance. So this is the bird. It's not particularly stunning. It's not like a raptor or a stunning bird of paradise. It's kind of dab and dowdy, whatnot. The male and female are very similar. But it is a very unique bird. This is the thing. You don't have to focus on this one here, but if you look at that, follow up the branch on the left-hand side here, and you'll see it goes up to crakes. The corncrake is a one-off. It's one of a kind. There is no subspecies. There are very few relations of any sort, but very few cross relations. The African crake is probably the closest that you get into it. And it's, even in the fossil record, extremely hard to find, to trace back. If we go back to the sort of lower Cretaceous, when you get the first of the modern types of birds that have survived the huge extinction event, it goes right through into what's known as the Palagene. It's in the last 35, 50 million years before anything that is remotely similar to what we're looking at. But it's a very primitive form of bird, but it is a very unique and one-off type. And it's maintained that form for all those millions of years. So to a large extent, it has perfectly adapted to the environment that it was living in. And it's only relatively recently, by which I mean in the last 100 years, that has begun to change substantially. And we'll go through that in a second or two as well. So you can see this within the great scheme of things. There are lots of grue forms, lots of birds, lots of aves. It goes through to rails and then the crakes, and then the one-off crakes. It's one of the few birds that's actually named for its sound. The crakes. They used to, in the olden times, decoy it with dry bones with notches in them and rub the notches, and you get this crack crack. But you get the same effect by taking a plastic comb and rubbing it down the edge of a credit card. You get this sound, which is quite distinctive, and it's named after the bird. I should say, I should have started off with a disclaimer. I got tested for COVID yesterday, so if I start coughing and spluttering halfway through, you'll hopefully forgive me. So this is an indication of where corncrakes are most recently and where they are now. You'll see there's a preponderance in the Outer Hebrides, the Inner Hebrides. Still quite a lot in Orkney, but very few elsewhere. They do turn up occasionally, in Aberdeenshire or in sort of Highland, the Highland Caithness or Sutherland, but very, very few. And this is heavily dependent upon the landforms within those areas. You can see from this that through the vernacular names in English and Scots and in Gaelic, that it is a well-known bird. It was known all over the place. It was throughout the whole of the UK, and it was a bird that was familiar. And it's quoted in Burns' poetry, for example, the echo mocks the corncrake, as each bird calls back to each other. So it's a huge, complicated issue is to unravel as to why the bird began to disappear. It began to disappear, really, I guess, following the agricultural revolution. It speeded up between the First and Second World War, and then just went on a huge steamroller from the southeast of England, sweeping up the country, right through to the borders, right through the Highlands. And the reason it remained much more protected in the Inner and Outer Hebrides in particular was because that was the domain of crofting agriculture. And crofting agriculture really was dependent upon small fields of labour-intensive work. It wasn't highly mechanized. It was small patchworks of fields of grass and silage and so on, and common grazing. And it took a long time before people joined the dots and realised that the demise of the corncrake was related to the increasing mechanization of agriculture. The birds were simply getting killed as fields of grass shifted from being cut slowly by people with scythes to being horse-drawn mowers, and then tractors, and then fast tractor-drawn mowers. Quite often, with the fields being cut from the margins spirally in towards the centre, and so the birds were driven towards the centre, refuge as it were, only to be mown down in the last few cuts, because the birds are very reluctant to go to open ground, and so the young chicks will follow the mothers very, very closely until it's too late, and then just get mangled within the areas. But in those areas that you see with the big dots all down the west coast of Uist and across the west coast of Lewis there, I'm up the very top near that big black dot. And in those areas, the persistence of initially hand-cut grass and then much more slow and much smaller fields, which allowed birds to move between fields at cutting time. So if we're looking at here, this is where we are, and this one here, and this northwest corner, and that's where I'm looking at in particular. Top area of there. And this is a view just of the croft where I am. The building on the top left there with the sort of just behind the trees there, the yellow building. That third window there is where I'm speaking to you from right now. And looking across there, you see it's not good agricultural land. It's marginal land for agriculture, but it really is top quality environmental land. We're looking at areas of sandy macher. We're looking at small patchwork fields, which until recently were quite intensively managed. If you look at the photographs between World War I and World War II, aerial photographs of these places here, they were intensely managed, but they were in like a patchwork quilt. There were some areas of potatoes, there'd be areas of grass, there'd be oats, there'd be areas of permanent grassland. Very close by, there'd be areas of heather, macher grassland on the front, and quite often you would find in the damp or the boggy places down towards the right of this photograph, you have shalloster, you have yellow flag iris. And when the birds are returning here, when corncrake return here in the spring, that's where they head first, because the grass is still quite short then. Corncrakes like this short grass. Ideally, they like grass just about knee-high. It is tall enough to cover them as they crouch their way through the grass with their young, looking for invertebrates, looking for worms, looking for beetles and so on. But it's open enough at the bottom to allow them to actually navigate their way through there. So they have protection from aerial predators. There are, of course, in the islands, there are no foxes, no badgers. Cats might be a problem in some places. But ground predators are thin on the ground. There was a mink problem for a while, but that's largely been stamped out. So another reason for that is they allow them to give them some shelter. So it gives them this close habitat to navigate the way through, but cover, because this is a very noisy bird. It took a while before scientists really realized that it's only the male that makes this creks call, this broadcast call. So every time you hear a crake calling, it's a male that's calling. And it's partly advertising their area, and this is my area, keep back, keep off, this is mine, I've booked it. But it's partly also an attraction for bringing in females. The males normally arrive a couple of weeks earlier than the females. They're maybe here for 2-3 weeks before people actually notice they're here, and then they begin to get an area that they particularly like, the habitat that they like, and then they begin to call. And as I was saying before the start of this meeting, just in the green room there, they will call between about 11 o'clock at night and 3 o'clock in the morning. 1 million calls over the course of a season. Wonderful, primitive, inspiring as a naturalist to hear them. But if it's right outside your window, it is a pain in the arse, believe me. It just goes on and on and on and on. And so, but in this part of the world, people really would look towards the corncrake in the way that many people further south think about the cuckoo. So they become very possessive when they say, have you heard the troon yet? Have you heard the troon in Gaelic? Have you heard the corncrake yet? Have you heard the troon yet? And when people hear it, they will tell you where they've heard it, because they feel quite, not possessive, but I guess fond of it. And it's recognised where they are within the landscape. And it's not uncommon for a village to have 2 or 3 of these at different places and different parts. And they will call back and forth with each other. And I'll come to that in more detail in a second or two. So they'll be here for a few weeks first. Then the females arrive and try to attract them. They try to attract a partner. They will. It is relatively recently, actually. I mean, so corncrakes only live for a couple of years, and they don't really breed until their second year. So, although there are sort of traditional sites or well-known sites where people hear them, it's not the same bird you're hearing every year. It's birds that are coming back to those areas. A more recent study that came out last year in Germany actually shows you they're really only about a third of them go back to the same sort of area, the same territory as they were as their natal area. So they're not like curlews, for example, who can nest in one area and then migrate and come back and nest on the same tuft of grass the next year. Corncrakes are not that faithful to their particular site, but they'll come back. But you can be fairly sure that although it wasn't perhaps the the same bird last year, it was probably that bird's father or grandfather as part of that thing there. So it's part of a nested territory as it comes in. But it's only comparatively recently, within the last 50 years, I guess, that people have begun to realise the calling sounds in that. The corncrake population trend is hugely dropped off. This is from Ireland, but it could equally well be Scotland. And you can see that there's a huge drop there as a switch towards intensive farming, mechanised cutting of grass going through, and it just forced these things. There is no competition with that. This is the same. It doesn't matter where you are. So the book I've tried to pull together isn't just the evidence from Scotland. It's across the Western Hemisphere, essentially. You don't get corncrakes in North America, but you do get corncrakes across Europe and into Russia, into European Russia and Asian Russia as it goes through there. And that's one of the surprises in the study, because we have been brought up in a diet for years that people admire about how the corncrakes are dropping off and the population's crashing, and there's even some, I suppose, the reputable scientists talking about the corncrake going extinct. What they really mean was extinct in this country, because it wasn't until about 1995, 96, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, when scientists began to speak to each other across the Iron Curtain and whatnot, that another 1 or 1.5 million calling birds were heard and were known from European Russia. So automatically, and these birds that was like 10, 15 times the best guess estimate up until that point. So although corncrake is still threatened and still quite precarious within this country, they are more common further east, still endangered, don't get me wrong, but they're much less threatened than many people have been led to believe. There are probably about 6.787 million individual birds across the globe in that sense. It's hard to know because, of course, most of the area in European and Asian Russia is uncensored, and they're just best guess estimates. So it may be actually higher. Birds have actually been heard. Corncrakes have been seen and heard as far east as Western China, in the Xinjiang area of China. So there may well be areas in there where we're finding birds that are not commonly censused and commonly known within the population as it goes through. And this is part of the problem. This is a bird that's rescued this year, alive, fortunately, rescued from a cat. This was in Lewis. Because the bird stands there and calls and just calls, they're fair game. They're basically advertising to cats, come and get me, come and get me. So they're quite small, as you see, just in here, go through. They tend to be awkward flyers, so they will run along the ground first and try to escape that way. But it's relatively uncommon for them to actually have a long life beyond a couple of years. In cutting the grass as it goes through there, part of the reason, as I said previously, about cutting in towards the centre was it particularly damaging for corncrakes. But in areas of most of the crofting areas, the so-called recommended plan of cutting from the centre to the edges isn't really feasible, because crofts quite often tend to be long and thin. And it isn't about, you can't do this sort of spiral out the way. So you have to mow from side to side. Even in areas like the Alps, for example, the alpine pastures, schemes have been brought in to encourage small farmers, crofters in the Alps, to try to cut asynchronously, cut at different times. It's no rocket science. If you cut all the grass in the one couple of days, all of a sudden you've gone from a very productive grass cover to nothing at all. The birds have got nowhere to go. So to try and get farmers to divide up into different areas and cut on a patchwork basis so birds can migrate from one field to the next while the cutting has been done, and then back to the areas to find the new invertebrates that are turned up in the soil, is a really important management strategy. It is only very, very recently that people have confirmed, for example, that corncrakes will have 2 clutches of eggs in a year. Up until quite recently, they were thought they just had 1 and that was it. But they're a serially promiscuous bird, because the corncrakes will call till it attracts a female, and they will breed. And when the last eggs are laid, the female will begin to hatch, and the male clears off. The male will move away and look for another territory, which may be, half a mile away, or it might be 30 miles away. It could be a huge difference. But then they will try to find an unattached female and have a second brood. The female will do the same. The female will raise and hatch the eggs. When the eggs are hatched, the young scatter quite quickly after that. They'll fall around for a few days and then scatter quite quickly, and the female herself will look for another partner. And try to raise a second brood, and with the raising of the second brood, will then leave a migration with the second brood. So it's quite an involved process. As I say, it wasn't well known until quite recently that was the case, and that has quite an impact on management as well, because we like to cut the grass with corncrakes in it as late as possible, sort of mid-August, mid towards late August. Now, on a working croft as I am, you get a bit edgy about that, because you're looking towards the weather all the time. You like to get your hay in, your grass in as quickly as you can, while it's good weather to dry it and bale it and get it inside. The longer you leave it, the more danger you are that you're not going to get a good grass in for the winter, and then have to buy it at a huge cost. So even some of the management schemes that are introduced that give compensation to cut late is quite a gamble, because if you judge it wrong, then you don't get your grass for your animals for the winter, and it will cost you more than you get in compensation, perhaps, to actually buy in grass from another area, from a mainland farm, perhaps, as it goes through there. So it's a very complex process. The idea of trying to get areas in part managed on a bigger scheme is quite important in this. So whole countryside management is a key thing. Across Europe, we're looking at probably less than 40% of all corncrakes are on protected land of any sort whatsoever, nature reserves, national parks, and so on and so forth. 60% at least are in the open countryside. And so the idea of relying on nature reserves, this artificial line on the map that we humans have drawn around something to say this area is protected, and you step across the boundary and it's not, is not really a good management tactic for corncrake, because they follow the habitat. There is no doubt in my mind, this is purely anecdotal as it were, but there's no doubt in my mind, if there was more available habitat, good habitat for corncrakes, we would have more corncrakes. Okay, there'd be more places for them to go. And a talk I was giving not so long ago, people were asking, why am I not seeing corncrakes in my area? And we looked at it in a bit more detail, and we said there's almost no good habitat for them in this area. There's no grass to attract them there. If you're a corncrake and you're flying back north from Africa as it comes through, you're not wedded to a particular patch of turf to go to. And if you see good habitat on your way up there, you'll go there. You'll go there first. And then when they have their first clutch, they'll move on, and they may well try some other area that's not commonly been nested before, to try and grow there. The area in the centre of the field, the photograph here, just in behind the blue tractor, in behind the wall, that's where the last corncrake I was hearing last year came into there. It was probably a second brood bird came in here and tried to get a mate, but didn't stay long. stayed slightly longer than I did on a rather damp night when I sat there trying to get a photograph for hours and then. And when I went away again, they started calling again. So they're very elusive birds. Usually in a public meeting, I would ask people to raise their hand if they've heard of corncrake, and a huge number of hands go up. And if you've actually seen the bird as well, and all the hands go down. They are very elusive. Quite often literature will say they're a secretive bird. I don't think they're a secretive bird at all. I think that's transmitting human emotions to them. They're not being secretive at all. They're just being careful. They don't want to get caught. They don't want to get eaten. And so they have this elusive tactic of staying in the tall grass. And even when they move to their African the quarters, they like the grasslands as well. The grass is different grass there. It's taller grass. It's much more like the sort of savanna type grass that you see, although it's not savanna in this case, in the southeast of Africa. But it's open at the centre that they can move around there, and it's taller. That protects them from aerial predators as it goes through. You can see in the map here then. Apart from the sort of western fringe here of Scotland and Ireland, we had some colleagues across from Ireland earlier on this year looking at trying to boost the population, and I'm hearing good things about corncrake numbers in Ireland this year. They're very, very low in Ireland and the Republic, but they are increasing very slightly. And they're using a lot of the techniques that have been piloted in Scotland and trying to grow sacrificial crops, areas, patches of nettles and so on and so forth to attract birds and give them cover to go through there. But you can see that it's not just although it's been eradicated largely from England because of intensive farming, it's right across Central, Eastern Europe, into Russia, into Far East, into China. Corncrake is a widely scattered bird. In bringing together the information for this book, I delved into, probably for the first time, tried to bring together a whole range of publications on the ecology of the bird. It's not just I'm not a twitcher. I don't like just adding things to lists. I like to know how it fits into the landscape, how they interact with other species within the landscape, and so I like to know where it goes, what it's doing, how it's surviving. And there are quite a lot of publications from Germany, from Poland, into the sort of the old Soviet countries. Now I don't speak Polish, but if you can, a lot of this stuff is online. You can bring this stuff online. You can bring the article, the PDF, onto your computer screen. You can put on your Google Translate and click on Polish to English and just hover your phone over the screen and it translates it automatically. It scans it automatically for you. I wouldn't like to read a whole book or a long paper on that, but it gives you enough information to read through and actually get the gist of what's happening and read the abstracts and understand what's happening with diagrams and so on and so forth. So again, it was this realization that it's much, much broader than we're looking at. But you can see that it's an entirely northern hemisphere bird, and yet over it's got here its wintering period. Again, I don't like that because it's not the winter. We're the mugs that stay here for the winter. The corncrake has 2 summers. It has a summer with us, then it goes south and has a summer in South Africa, and then it comes back and has the next summer with us. And so they follow that good weather. When it goes back into southern Africa, it largely goes into the area of East South Africa and Mozambique, Zambia in that area there, and it stays there until the wet period becomes. And when it starts to become their winter rainy season, they fly back north. While they're down there, they more or less cohabitate in the same habitat area with the African crake, their distant relative. Corncrake is largely silent when it's not breeding, and so the male is the calling thing is associated with the setting up of the territorial and the breeding pattern. The female again was not thought to call at all until very recently, but actually does call, but it doesn't make that broadcast call. But both male and female are largely silent and solitary when they're in their non-breeding period in South and East Africa. If you look at the recorded sightings of corncrake when they've moved, most birds have two major flight paths. If I go back a second, you'll see that even the birds in the Far East from us, over in European, in Russian Asia, Asian Russia, and in Eastern China, these birds also head for Southern and Eastern Africa. So it's like a sort of pincer movement that comes down, which is fascinating. You would expect if the birds are going to migrate south for good weather, then the ones further east would probably move down into Malaysia or the Philippines and that sort of stuff there. But no, they all come. They all sort of have their annual family reunion in South Africa. They largely fly down two main flyways over the Straits of Gibraltar, down along the coast of that over there, and then down across West Africa below the Sahara into the eastern seaboard, and then down through Tanzania, Uganda, and so on and so forth. Or else they will come down the eastern end of the Mediterranean. They'll come down through the Lebanon, through Israel. A lot of the sightings you'll see, if you look at the top of Egypt there's a lot of the sightings from along the coast there. In the migration season, there are miles and miles of netting along that coast to trap the birds, mainly looking to trap the quail for food, but quite often corncrake will fly in company with quail, largely night flights, and so lots of corncrake will get caught in the nets as well. It does cause damage to the population, but it doesn't seem to be hugely significant because of the high death rate the high mortality rate of corncrakes anyway. It would certainly be better if it wasn't there, but that in itself is not a major cause of the population decline. The population decline is largely the failure in reproduction, the failure of nests and eggs and so on as it goes through. But you can see there are records there from almost everywhere in Africa. There's a wonderful record. There's a dot in the middle of the Congo there. There's a wonderful bird that was ringed in call, and the bird was tracked to a jungle clearing in the Congo, where it stayed for the summer, and then flew back to the Hebrides. And so you can almost imagine that bird getting as far as the Congo and thinking, why am I bothering going all the way to South Africa when I can just spend the time here? It's 6.5 dozen really, and then it went back. So there are sightings from all the place, but by and large they will move down south from there. And if you look at the migration patterns, you can see this quite clearly how it goes through. They'll leave here at the end of the summer, so they'll be leaving from the Hebrides late August perhaps, and then there'll be a peak going down there, passing through Egypt all of a sudden, and then down through. The next peak, will be into Kenya and into Zambia as it goes through there, and eventually into South Africa, and then back up through, the northward migration, more or less the same path. Although that's much difficult to know because we're not seeing them in the flocks. You can imagine in the huge area of the African landscape, and indeed in the Asian Russia landscape, you're looking at a huge area to cover. You're looking at very few, enthusiastic bird watchers. So very few people on the ground for a start. Of the people who are there, very few of them will be interested in birds. Of the ones that are, the chances of them being in the right place at the right time to see the corncrake as they arrive, and then having the savvy to understand what it is, and then having the interest to report it, it gets minimally much smaller. So the chances of actually finding and having it reported and having it recorded are very, very highly against being spotted. But they make their way further north. We don't really know if they come back the same route or north. We don't, or a different route, alternative route. They don't like flying across the Mediterranean. They like to go up either end there, but we don't know if they go up one way and back the other way or not. It's just we don't know particularly if the males and females go the same route. or if they go differently. There's so much more to learn about them that is quite surprising as it goes through. Here they are, female in the front, male in the background. They're almost indistinguishable. You have to get them in the hand really, and get the female with the brood patch, a little bare patch on the belly where they'll give extra warmth to the eggs they're incubating, and that's the best way to tell them. They are slightly smaller, but not so that you would notice. Even in the hand, they're only probably about a centimetre shorter on the wingspan and so on as it goes through there. And as I say, the males will call, advertising their presence and attracting the female as it goes through. So even within the hand, it's quite difficult. So this is again part of the enigma about the animals. The people thought when corncrakes left, up until after the First World War, it was quite commonly thought that they hibernated. They didn't go anywhere, they just hid. So they would say a corncrake will hide in the walls, they will go into the trees, they will just snuggle down, and that's where they disappeared to, because they couldn't imagine these small stubby wings would take them all the way to South Africa and back again in the course of a season. So very little was known about them, and very little was attempted to find out about them, because they were found to be reclusive and difficult to study. But even when you have them in the hand, you really have to look at the wing length compared to the head and bill length to differentiate male and female. And you can see the males are slightly bigger in the top there, and the females are slightly bigger, slightly smaller on the bottom there. The timing of the broods, you can imagine. If you're flying back from Africa, you arrive in Switzerland, for example, and Austria, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, before you arrive in Germany and in Scotland, in Scandinavia. And so there'll be an earlier start to breeding there. And then if they're going to have a second clutch, it will be slightly earlier. And so there's more chance. So it's in Scotland that we have the difficulty with the habitat, because they're breeding just about the time that we want to actually encourage cutting for grass for animals for the long winter that we're going to be feeding. So looking at these things, it's about how you actually encourage the division of whole countryside management to make sure there's enough grass for farmers and crofters and enough grass for corncrakes at different times of the season, different times of the year. There's the chick. It's just a wee ball of fluff running around there. It says very early on they will disappear from the female and make their own way as it goes in the grass as it goes through there. They'll stick around the general area for a while, but then they will drift off, and quite happily will drift away before the mother actually leaves the area. This again, when you get the chicks, they're really hugely hard to identify when they're there and how old they are, and the best way to do it is actually just to weigh them, because as they put on weight very, very quickly from this small, literally, hen's egg sized little bundle of fluff. It grows through quickly into a sort of small chicken, like a bantam, as it goes through. They put on weight very, very quickly. So if you actually catch them and weigh them, you can quite accurately date how old they are. And by the time they're actually fledging in sort of within about a month, they're ready to fly. By that time, they're quite self-reliant and quite independent. This is just another way of going through these things and just checking that by the wax cover on the wing, how much of that is showing can actually tell you how old it is as it goes through there. So they're not like a lot of birds that we'll see very, very quickly. They go from one colour to another colour as they go from juvenile to male. They're quite difficult to see as it goes through there. And what they're mostly known for is their raucous call. So I'd like to this is one of the most surprising things that I found when I delved into it. I found quite a lot. I thought I knew a lot about corncrakes because they've been, as I said, they've been around me certainly virtually all my adult life, that I can grow up there. I was really quite surprised because corncrakes are actually quite distinctive. You have this analysis of corncrakes. To you and I, the corncrake sounds very, very similar. Just this cracking sound, like a comb being dragged along a plastic card. But actually, if you record it and analyze it, each corncrake is individual. Each corncrake is different. So you look at the gap here between the crake. So the length of the crake, the space between the two crakes, and the space between the crake and the next crake are different for every different bird. So if you record it and analyze it and do this sonogram and then record another bird the next night, you can see quite categorically that's George that we heard last night because it's the same sound. Whereas if you hear a different bird in a different part, it will have a different sonogram as it goes through there. And the fascinating thing is there that the birds themselves respond differently within their small community. So corncrakes, as they're calling back and forward, will recognize the calling bird by its calling pattern. And they will know, I don't have to worry about that one, that's just George next door. We know George, So quite often corncrake males will go exploring in neighbouring territories during the night, looking for the female, looking to pinch the female, mate with her. But if they recognise the call, they don't respond so aggressively. They will respond. They will give their crack. This is my patch. Here I am. I'm on territory. But they won't be hugely aggressive towards it. If they do not recognise the call, they're much more aggressive. They're much more physical in that thing. And there are early examples of wildlife photographers who would have a dummy. And would have a call recording, and if a corncrake male came in and heard the bird calling, would come in and would attack the dummy, and try to flap their wings and chase them away and so on and so forth as it goes through there. So they're quite distinctive. The fascinating thing is there that within areas they begin to develop a dialect, so they actually begin to sound similar to each other. They'll pick up sounds across the season. And so if a bird has its clutch, has its first brood, and then leaves to another area, when it goes into that area, its corncrake call will be different and will be recognised by the birds in that area. Now, you can do this yourself by going onto one of these Xenocanto websites, for example, with bird song repositories. But I'll try and play this to you just from my mobile phone here, downloaded. I'll play you 2 or 3 corncrake calls, and you will see that although we think it's just a monotonous crack all the time, actually, when you listen to them sequentially, they're quite different. Listen to this. Okay, now listen to this one. Again. And the third one. So each corncrake, obviously, it's going to be like a human voice. There will be eventually, sometimes you're listening on the radio and you'll think, oh, that just sounds just like my friend Frank. There will be people who sound like each other, that have the same intonation, the same sound in their voice. That will happen in corncrakes as well, of course. But within a limited number, within a population of probably about 200 or so, maybe a bit more, the corncrake calling individual calling bird is unique to that area, that call. So it's quite a useful marker, and it has possibilities of actually tracing them as they go through a territory within a larger area, because obviously they only call when they're breeding as it goes through there. So there has been traced. There are reports of them being the same bird coming back the next year, and it has the same call. So the call doesn't change. The call is individual to that particular bird. So it's an interesting way of actually bringing in the census as well. So they make their way through the grass as it goes through there. As I say, they're quite omnivorous for insects and bugs. They will. One of the strengths of the corncrake is they will eat what they can find on the ground. So they will eat. They'll eat earthworms from the ground if they can find it. They will eat bugs. If they go further into Poland, for example, they will eat insects that they pluck from the air. So this is another reason why it's good for the grass to be cut. You don't want the grass to grow rank, because the rank grass doesn't allow them to navigate freely along through the stems at ground level, but also it doesn't support the same insect community, the same invertebrate community within the ground, and they can't get access to the food as it goes through there. So one of the flexibilities, the adaptability of its feeding is a strength for the corncrake as it goes through there, and one of the reasons it's actually managed to maintain its numbers to the level it has done so. This is the iris that I mentioned earlier. This is the common area that we'll come to when it arrives first in the country into Scotland, because it's tall and quite dense. They can hide within there, and it's a case of then moving out of there into the fields, the crofts as they go around there, as that grass grows and as they begin to establish as it goes through. You can see in different areas that it favours pasture. It's not too keen on forest and grasslands. So abandonment of when the collapse of the Soviet Union happened, a lot of collective farms just went bust. They just stopped. And for the first few years, that was really good for wildlife, because it thrived on that farmland that was managing. But as the grass became more tough and more rank, more overgrown, as shrubs began to grow and trees began to grow from there, it became less productive and less attractive for birds like the corncrake, for example. So intensification of farming is not good for it, but neither is abandonment. You want that happy mix. In the northern areas of European Russia, where farms were abandoned, people stopped having dairy cattle. It just wasn't commercially viable for them without the state support in there. They stopped having dairy cattle. Therefore, they had no need to grow grass for grazing, and therefore there was no habitat for corncrakes. So that thing has changed. Since about 2000, the population seems to have stabled within the Russian zone. But it's a movable feast. The corncrake is one of these, a very unique bird that went from on the red list being an endangered bird to being least threatened within just about 4 or 5 years, as this other huge population was discovered, in inverted commas, further east and into the European mainland. So we do have a bit of habitat management to do, cutting the grass in these areas. This is in the local community-owned nature reserve near the Butt of Lewis, where this is Loch Chiapavat. So this grassland is excellent from that. If you're ever up here on holiday, there's a hide down by the loch, and quite commonly you can go there on a summer evening, open the windows and hear several corncrakes quite close to where you are. You can hear them calling back and forward at a distance there. And this is just managed to maintain some areas of open grass and encourage new growth as it comes in. We've also taken some areas where there are some fields, some crofts that are less used or underused, or maybe some old crofters that are not particularly interested in are not able to work the land anymore. And here is us planting some flag iris to create patches of habitat as it goes through there. And I'm glad to see, I mean, this that this is actually the population of corncrake within Scotland made a good comeback until a few years ago. Slight dip. In some areas there's a slight rise, in some areas there's a slight decrease, and so it is very variable. It's still, on a knife edge. In this area, in the north and west of Lewis there, we have increased the numbers slightly over the last decade by careful management of the land like this. So this is the area, just to the top of that area is where that photograph was taken. This is just north of where I stay, and you can see there are corncrake territories all around the area, all around these long thin crofts, and quite often within those areas where we've actually encouraged grassland for this, and grazing of cattle within areas. I mean, it has been sheep and cattle have like in many cases, they may have trod on eggs and smashed eggs in some cases, but there are now experiments with what they call no fence collars that you can put on the cattle, that rather than an electric fence that gives them a shock, that it will encourage them to stay within a certain area and not to drift out of those areas as it goes in there. So you can manage where the animals go and graze the ground around them to create the right habitat to against that. So numbers have risen slightly. Nothing to be too relaxed about, but certainly heading in the right direction, and very, very hopeful that as it goes through there. A lot of this is in the book, it's documented in the book as it goes through there. I should have said at the start, I spoke to the publishers, Whittle's publishers, Whittle's books. The book is called The Corncrake, The Ecology of an Enigma. And if you go onto their website, if you want to buy the book, when you get asked for purchasing a discount code, if you put ccrake 20, all one word, ccrake and the letters 20 for 20, put it into discount and you get a 20% discount on the book through direct from the publishers. That's what the book looks like. The photographs, as I say, were courtesy of my friend John Love, and this wonderful cover by a local artist, Alice McMillan, who lives just in the next village from me. I have the print, and we got her to give us permission to put that on the cover. It just to me, it captures the vibrancy of the corncrakes and the environment. So that's a whirlwind tour. There's lots and lots more I could say. I hope I was clear enough to what I did say. I'll stop sharing now and come back and see if you have any questions.
Great, many thanks, Frank. Yeah, really fascinating talk, and I can see quite a few questions in here already, so I'll fire away with some of these. So Alan's asking, do hen harriers take corncrake?
It's not, up until the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years, we haven't really had hen harriers in Lewis. Hen harriers are a new phenomenon in Lewis. They were expanding from North Uist. They probably will. There's no strong track record of them doing so. They're quite big birds. They're quite bulky birds as it goes through there. You will certainly find the bigger raptors going for corncrake. But the biggest danger by a long way are domestic cats. Cats going out there stalking at night. Your pet muggy. They're just natural hunters, and they go out there and they will chase around there through the long grass. And the corncrake just more or less stand up on the little knoll, the little high patch of land, and call and advertise their presence. So they're the biggest danger, I'm afraid, as it goes through there.
And David's asking, what might corncrake populations have been like in the UK pre-agriculture?
Oh God, enormous. I mean, there are sounds. I was saying that to John at the start of the talk. We have both have family links with Orkney, and there are stories of early naturalists, the Harvey Browns and so on and so forth, walking through the islands, both in Orkney, Lewis, North and South Uist, and literally having birds calling, competing, walking along a village road and discovering 10 birds in one village and 12 in the next as they go through there. So they were everywhere, all over the place. So part of the problem is a huge, it's a demanding, migration is itself is a demanding trip. And if you're migrating over the Sahara and the Sahel and you're dodging, guns in France and Algeria and Egypt, netting, it's a complex thing to navigate. So there's a high mortality of birds going through there, but there's undoubtedly part of that is going to be the demands of finding the right place to nest, to get down and nest, and getting that accommodation, that habitat they can find. The loss of that habitat is the biggest loss, biggest threat to corncrake. The second biggest loss is going to be predation from that there. And everything else, sadly, all the migration, the trapping, the shootings and whatnot, it doesn't help, that's for sure, but it's much, much lower on the scale than all the damage we're doing with destroying the habitat available.
And Ellie's asking, how was suitable corncrake habitat maintained prior to human farming / crofting? Would it have been by wild herbivores?
Well, we're looking at areas. I mean, you're probably finding that corncrakes were filling up further south and branching out, moving in there as agriculture progressed. You're looking at areas where corncrake are now have been managed for agriculture for well over 1,000 years. In that very much patchwork style. And so farming further south and the lowlands of Scotland into England, particularly down in southeast England with large fields getting knocked together, farms getting knocked together, having huge big areas. That has been a huge driving factor in reduction of the habitat available for them. And birds have then drifted down looking for habitat where they can find it. And that has been branching out further north. There's very little, it seems, movement between the populations. So very few of the birds will go across to Ireland or from Ireland to here, or from here into Poland, for example. So they will come back from their non-breeding period in South Africa, and they will, in flying north, they will tend to go back about a third to the rough areas where they grew up. But about 2/3 of them may well stop off on the way if they see other better habitat or good habitat as they go through there. So it's quite common, for example, in Switzerland, when the birds arrive first, they try and nest in the lowland grassland areas, the agricultural areas that are heavily managed in Switzerland. And so there's a huge failure of the nests in the first clutch. And then the second clutch, the birds move higher up into the Alps, to the higher pastures, where obviously the season is later and the grass is longer, and later getting cut, and try and have their second brood there, which tends to be more successful. And so I think the Swiss birders have been trying to focus attention there to try and to manage the area of the second brood in the higher areas, rather than to try to sort of go up against the unwinnable battle of the lowland farm, which is intensively managed on an industrial scale. Even in areas where, for example, in Germany or in Poland, where the corncrakes will commonly nest upon in floodplain areas, so areas marginal to farming, wetland areas, boggy land, and they don't like totally squishy wetland, but damp is fine. They're not like their African cousins that will like plod about in standing water. But they like to that in those river floodplains. And the beauty of that is that when the winter season comes and the big floods comes down, it clears away a lot of the dead grass and the dross that builds up there and opens up the landscape again, so they can go in there. If you look at part of the areas in Ireland where areas have been flooded and not been cleared, and the area has become unproductive for corncrakes because the ground is just too closely webbed and it's too closely dense for the birds to actually move around comfortably at ground level.
Great. Well, I can see quite a lot of questions here. So next we've got William asking, he says, very interesting and enjoyable talk. Can I ask if the current bird flu affects this bird? Thank you.
It will undoubtedly do so. It's possibly, this is my, I don't like to work on intuition. I'm a friend of the quote from Carl Sagan, when Carl Sagan was asked about, he was getting challenged by a journalist to say what was his thought on alien life, and he refused to be drawn. And the frustrated journalist said, "Well, give me your gut feeling on that." And he said, "I try not to think with my guts." So my instinct on this would be that it's possibly less endangered than many, because the corncrake is not colonial. It's a solitary nester, so it doesn't nest in large colonies where they might spread the infection much faster. But that doesn't make it any more immune. I mean, that's as I say. I mean, I've managed to capture COVID the last couple of days there, and I hardly see anybody. I live in quite a rural area, and I don't mix in large crowds and pop concerts and whatnot as well. And the virus still managed to find me. So I think the bird will not be immune from avian flu, certainly, but I would hope it would be less endangered than many. Although, having said that, the hide and the nature reserve I just showed you the last few slides there, that has been closed in the last few weeks because of a local outbreak of avian flu, and it was closed down entirely to prevent people moving back and forward from the areas and carrying the infection in their boots and so on and so forth. So it won't be entirely free, but hopefully it has some protection by being a solitary nester rather than a colonial bird.
And next question is, have any crakes had GPS trackers put on them as cuckoos have?
Well, yeah, I mean the one I mentioned there, that went straight from the island of Col to the Congo as the showbiz star of the thing, because that was the track all the way across there. Yeah, they do. They go through. They have been done. I think that is a definite area for future research. That is a really possible. As trackers get much smaller and much lighter, the ability to put it on a number of birds and follow through that, it could be really fascinating as it goes through there. I was speaking to another colleague who does some of the nocturnal migration, so-called knock-mig, where they basically put out a microphone in the garden and go to sleep and then play back the recording and fast track the next day and see what they heard overnight. And there have been things like end of the season there. Corncrakes have been detected going through places like Manchester and some of the big urban cities as it goes through there. No one ever sees them because they travel through at night, and even if they did, people wouldn't. They're, as I say, they're quite reclusive. They don't strut about in broad daylight. They'll go through there. They'll take shelter, but they're there. They've got to get from the north to the southern part of Africa somehow, and so it's obviously that they're making jump, hop, skip, and jump all the way down as always through there. So they're definitely going to be there at some point. It just putting on a whole set of GPS trackers would be quite expensive, but it'd be a really interesting project to follow through.
And the next question from Martin is it's kind of a two-part question. So the first bit is, do you envisage it becoming more challenging to incentivize farmers to cut later in the year with the future impacts of climate change in terms of unpredictable weather events, etc.? And then the second part is, and if some farmers claim subsidy to cut later, but then have to import grass from elsewhere due to bad weather, does this not just encourage earlier cutting in those other areas and displace the problem of habitat loss elsewhere?
Yeah, that is a really complex issue. I mean, there is no blueprint for how you do these things because, you know, you're looking at you're balancing one you know one species against another species as it goes through there. I was discussing with another colleague just a few days ago about you know um, birds of prey taking that are rare themselves, taking other rare birds' prey as it goes through there. And what do you want to do? Do you want to, which one do you want to protect? Do you want to protect both of them? Do you want to stand back and let it happen? Um, the I think there's an extreme goodwill in the crofting community to work for corncrakes. Not just now, but traditionally. I remember being told as a boy about people being farmers, cutting grass, seeing a nest, stopping, removing the nest, cutting, putting the nest back, and moving on again. That was almost the etiquette, the done thing. You were taught to do that as it goes through there. So crofters have a long tradition of that. The difficulty is in balancing this thing about the cutting date. And if you can cut date, I think that one of the things that's in our favour is that we cut silage now or haylage now rather than hay. When I was much younger, we cut hay and we dried hay and we didn't even bale it in those days. We made stacks, but then you make it into to bales and small bales. Now we make big round bales with haylage. And the advantage of that is that it doesn't have to be perfectly dry. If you need a good 3 or 4 days of good drying and that sort of stuff. If you get 2 or 3 days and you get good drying weather and you get it near as damn it, then you can bin it as haylage and it's really good quality for the winter. And that allows you that leeway to cut it a bit later if you have to. And so I think there's a good scheme within that. Also, I think within the crofting community, there is a because it's not driven purely by economic drivers. Crofts are small. Crofts are not going to be, I don't know really any full-time crofters. People have other jobs to do. Crofting has become much more a part-time activity than most farming activities. And in those areas, because it's not driven purely by commercial drivers, then people are more inclined to actually set aside parts of fields or corners of fields or edges of fields and whatnot that are not cut, that are maintained, that are left there for wildlife corridors as it goes through there. So this is back to my point about looking at, rather than trying to manage individual crofts or nature reserves or even national parks on that bigger scale, you're looking at the whole landscape and looking at these things in a much more holistic view to try and make these things through, and actually rewarding people there by incentivizing what you're doing and making that. I saw a great project in Ireland, for example, where people were talking about corncrake tourism. The corncrake is so iconic of rural places that people are will come in to see. It's like going to Africa to see a lion or whatnot. They come to get a corncrake, and so they're running bus trips over the breeding season to take people out to let them hear corncrakes and track them through, and using night vision cameras to see them moving among the grass and whatnot. So the potential of actually showing people that there's a potential way of earning some income from these things without exploiting and damaging the animals is going to be a really interesting way forward. So I'm actually quite hopeful in that as it goes through. I don't see that as a problem. I think more problematic it's going to be is about the movement of there's a general drift of birds north with climate change. So birds are actually coming up later and moving into there, and so we may see a variation in the arrival of the corncrakes as it goes through there, and how that relates to the wintering population and leaving in terms of the harvest and whatnot is a long term calculation really. I couldn't answer that right now.
Actually, that ties into the next question, which you partly covered there, Graham, asking what do you see the prospect for corncrake numbers over the next 20 years. Is climate change having any impact? Which you've answered that in part. But
Yeah. I think inevitably will have an impact, but it's a bit early to see what that impact might be.
And someone's asking, do livestock have to be excluded from areas where there are likely to be nests? Oh, you mentioned before about the collars, didn't you, being a...
For cattle, for cattle, because cattle tend to be big clumsy feet, and they will just, especially for the eggs. The young are quite mobile. Sorry. The young are quite mobile and quite nippy, so they'll get out of the way very quickly as it goes through there. But it's not unheard of for animals to stand on that. But again, it's not a huge issue. It's just something to be wary of that as it goes through there. These no fence collars, you can literally have a map of your croft on the phone and draw a line on the area that you want to maintain the animals in, and they'll stay within that area. Just because of the no fence collar as it goes through there. So that again is an incentive that's been piloted here in this area just now, and it seems to be quite effective.
Well, so there's loads more questions here. If you're happy to take a few more,
I'm easy. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Jennifer asking, is there a danger from rats?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that's, as I say, most of the areas most of the islands certainly have got no foxes, wildcats, all that sort of stuff there, but certainly rats would be an issue, be a problem as it goes through there. It's difficult to know what the predation rate is going to be in that. I think you're looking at them bringing into maybe having clutches of 5, 6, 7 birds. Let's say maybe two clutches if they're successful and have 2 clutches. But of those 12, 14 birds, substantially less than half will survive to the following year, depending on where they are. So it's quite difficult to know. It's quite difficult to know what the dynamic is in that. And if you look at the bigger picture, this is why conservation is an international effort, because it needs to be. You need to look at the bigger picture. The stark example is the discovery of another 1.5 million, calling birds and calling males in European Russia the minute people started to speak to each other. And up until that point, nobody in the West knew they were there. And so RSPB, big thing about, this is a big threat and whatnot. Yes, it is a big threat in this country, but if you go across there, there's a photograph in one of the papers there about corncrake calling birds in the middle of Moscow, in the park in the middle of Moscow. So it's not as if these things are unknown. It's just they're not communicated to the same extent as it goes through there, and it needs that international cooperation to find out what the danger is, and that's why your GPS tracking is going to be a good one as well, and following through there, and that's quite difficult for a high mortality bird like that. You put a lot with any ringing activities. You put a lot of rings out there for not very much return. The chances of finding a ring, having it identified, reported, and then fed back to you is very, very small. But the information is really, really powerful as it goes through there. It lets you know what happened and perhaps how the bird died and how it was found and so on and so forth as it goes through there. But with a high mortality bird that only lives in 2 or 3 years anyway, then you need to put out an awful lot of trackers with that sort of stuff there and lose them before you actually be able to get enough information coming back as it goes through there.
So, maybe just one more question, and I'll hand on back over to Don. So, Andrew asking, how long does the full one-way migration take? Do the birds flap or glide to achieve this?
I think they flap like hell all the way. Is the answer. I think they are. They have this. They have these short, stubby wings, but they go through there. But they do. They are known to sort of have various drop-off stops as it goes through there. So you're looking at probably about a couple of months all the way down there, back up again. But they're spotted quite frequently in things like golf courses and country parks and various parts of the continent as it goes through there. They would then drift around in grassland areas in southern southeastern Africa. But it's like, in the same way that we are surprised that corncrakes arrive and they're here for 2 or 3 weeks before they actually hear them calling, then people who've been watching them in southern East Africa have the reverse experience. One day they're there, and then it's like, they're not. When did you last hear them? I don't know. It's probably several weeks. They're gone. They are the undercover. There's a great project. I was doing a talk with RSPB in North US just a couple of months ago there, and they had been working with a school in the Central Belt, and they had this wonderful display that the kids had developed about the story of the corncrake. And the corncrake was like an undercover. It was like Peter Sellers, Clouseau, because he was so hidden and sneaking about in his raincoat and disappearing and popping up here and whatnot. It was a great story. It was the corncrake as a detective that was hiding among the grass. Can you spot this undercover spy as he appears in your backyard? It was great, and that's what enervates. That's what encourages people to feel much more so protective about the birds as it goes through there. It isn't just it's a sort of a nice fluffy animal that people can like, because it's not a particularly bonny bird. I mean, it's not a sort of thing like, it's not like a majestic merlin or a white-tailed eagle or a peregrine that's swooping. It's not nothing like that. But it is so iconic for a particular style of lifestyle. There are stories. One of the curious things that I found is there are so few stories in folklore about it. There's a story about, I think it was in Tiree, that a corncrake used to come into the crofter's kitchen and steal scraps and was fed with the hens occasionally as it goes through there, because there was Tiree. There's a large population of corncrakes in Tiree because of the land management style they have there. But there are few stories about corncrakes, and I think it's because they were so common. They were everywhere. They weren't unique. They weren't special, as it were. That's a sense that people had them everywhere until they weren't there any longer. And that's part of the dilemma of modern conservation as it goes through there. I've been doing some work recently with a colleague, a scientist in Faroe, looking at place names in the landscape relating to birds, comparing the Outer Hebrides with the Faroe Islands. And in the Hebrides, I've got some hundreds of names of places that are named after particular birds, the Crag of the Eagles and all that sort of stuff there, in Gaelic, obviously. There is nothing anywhere about the corncrake. And I at first I found this astonishing. But then the rationale that I have in that is that why would you call that the hill of the corncrake? Because there's another one over there and another one over there. They're everywhere. It's nothing unremarkable. And so they were just everywhere. And then, as I say, through time, whatnot, they have gone. And so that is a sort of salutary lesson within there. Value what you have while you still have it, and what you can make a difference to actually to bringing it through there. And the idea of if even simple things like in key areas, putting little collars on the cats so the bird hears them coming and can clear off as it goes through there, might make a huge difference in terms of that local population as it goes through. So there are various things there that we can go through, and I think it's one of the things that I was really surprised in as I went through there and I got stuck in there. As I said at the start, I thought I knew a lot about corncrakes, and it began for me about trying to corral all this stuff and get it all into one place and make sense of it. But as I got deeper and deeper into it, I realised there was so much that I didn't know. And I called in various friends and colleagues and all that sort of stuff there. And if I had £1 for every time that I phoned somebody who's expert in an area, and they went, "Oh, that's a good question. I don't know what the answer is." So it's that ability to admit, "Geez, we don't know that question. That's a good question. Maybe we should start looking at that in more detail as well." So I think there's a lot more we can find out about them, and particularly using more modern techniques, things like infrared cameras to watch them, heat cameras. You can see heat cameras watching as they go through there. You can see them in the tall grass at night when it's just pitch dark. You can't see them, so you can see them by heat camera. You can record them on sonograph, identify that as an individual bird, and then see that bird in a different field the next day. That's a huge change in the technology that will help us management in the long-term future.
That's great. Fantastic. So many thanks. Really enjoyed that. And I'll hand back over to our chair, John Cromarty.
Thank you very much indeed, Dan. And thank you very much, Frank. What a cracking start to our autumn programme of events. That was just brilliant. I always thought that the corncrake was a unique sort of bird. But in my childhood, its call was relatively and sometimes annoyingly common in my summer holiday location of North Ronaldsay in Orkney. Yeah. So thank you so much for the introduction to your talk, Frank, explaining just how unique the bird is. A lot of new information there for a lot of us, I'm quite sure. Thank you also for your very detailed maps, your statistics and analysis, explaining how they're now very far from common, in fact, mostly absent from much of the UK, but also for your detailed coverage of the prevalence of the bird internationally. It's strangely reassuring, I guess, to know that it's a bird which is widely scattered through Central and Eastern Europe, Eastern China, European Russia. It's interesting that all the Northern Hemisphere populations migrate to the southeast of South Africa also. In my mind, the corncrake's a bird that really doesn't strike you as being a long-range flyer or an efficient flyer. It seems quite an ungainly sort of bird, as you say, with its short, fluffy wings, particularly compared to birds that look the part for long-distance migration, like the Arctic tern, for example. Many thanks, Frank, for bringing together such a comprehensive review of information from so many countries on what is clearly a difficult topic and one which most of us, even people interested in birding, know relatively little about. Just fascinating, very informative, very educational and entertaining. Many, I think, of tonight's participants, even those of us islanders who are somehow used to the bird and its call, will have learned so much about the corncrake tonight that we simply didn't know until you neatly summarised for us all of the published information about the unique bird, the corncrake. So, Frank, as I say, what a cracking start to our autumn programme of events, and I'm particularly grateful to you for fighting through COVID to still be with us tonight and to give us such an excellent presentation. Very much appreciated, and I've been noticing all the comments coming in from participants who really very complimentary about the presentation and how interesting and informative it was. So our very sincere thanks to you for being with us tonight. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I would also like just to close off with a few other thanks. I would like to thank Jill, our SWT engagement manager, for all of her help and encouragement in extending the benefits of tonight's presentation, not just to the whole of the north of Scotland, Outer Hebrides, Orkney and Shetland, but to the rest of the country. And it'd be interesting to see if we had any international participants tonight amongst the list who engaged in tonight's presentation. So, Jill, thank you very much for all your help in running it as a national webinar. Much appreciated. Dan, many thanks to you also for your usual excellent form in handling the questions and discussion. I know there were a lot more questions, but I think we really ought to let Frank go. He's done exceptionally well, and he's had a good half hour very kindly answering many interesting questions with a lot more of information. And of course, last but not least, to you, the participants, thank you all very much indeed for supporting this event on such a fascinating topic. For those of you who are interested in our next Zoom meeting event, this will be on Wednesday, the 1st of November at 7:30, and it's an overview of the Scottish Raptor Monitoring Scheme, which will be given by Amy Chalice. She's the Scottish Raptor Monitoring Coordinator. So we look forward to your participation for that event and to our subsequent events as we go through the autumn and into the winter programme. So thank you all very much indeed, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you and good night, everybody.
Okay. Goodbye. Good night.